As the name suggests, this is Nornek bringing you the first training session, or tutorial video for my program Midinous. If you're interested in using the program, or if you'd like to follow along, please read the description below. That is all the details you need. I got some feedback about the demo video, where not many people tried it because they didn't know where to start. The link, which takes you to the GitHub page for the project, has all the details and system requirements. You'll see the link appear throughout this tutorial for reference, and it can also be found in the description of this video. Midinous is licensed free software, so you can use it at your leisure in accordance with said license. A copy of the license comes with the software and can be found in the source code library. If you have a MIDI controller, have it on and ready, not tied to a DAW, before opening Midinous. For the purposes of this tutorial, however, we will not be using a controller. Open the program by navigating to the Midinous install directory and double-clicking midinous.rb. Usually, ruby install folder /lib/ruby/gems/x.x.x, which is the version /gems/midinous-version/lib. Or by creating a shortcut from there that you can use anywhere on your system. The desktop or taskbar is a helpful shortcut. I recommend this method. Note that if you pin Ruby apps like Midinous to the taskbar in Windows, it will pin the actual language interpreter with the specifically pinned app as a submenu. You'll have to right-click the taskbar item and choose Midinous from the list to open it. Still faster than the directory method, though. If you reinstall Midinous to a newer version, you'll have to repeat the shortcut create steps. Once in Midinous, you'll notice a few key areas. The main toolbar, where you can execute file operations and view help. The toolbox, where your main editing tools are. The performance section, where play and stop commands are. The editing area with grid. Point properties, where you'll be modifying the properties of selected points. Tempo, time signature, scale and root, and the scale selector. And the status bar at the bottom, with information about inputs, outputs, and output channel. Output channel is only relevant if using a controller. By default, Midinous selects the first available input and output it can. If using Windows, by default the output will be the installed Microsoft GS synth. This comes with Windows. To change the inputs and outputs on the main toolbar, select Input, followed by your controller. Inputs will not show up in the list unless there is more than one available. This is to avoid cascading MIDI message problems upon first play. So I went ahead and turned on my Launchpad Pro. So we'll go Edit, IO Regenerate, and we'll see our inputs are now populated, and input channel as well. Select Input Channel to route the input from the controller to a channel in the DAW. Select Output to choose where MIDI will be routed. If you don't want to use the Microsoft GS synth, select the virtual MIDI port name here. Up in the main toolbar, you can click on the Help menu where you will see several options. About, Notes by integer, scale and intervals, and hotkeys. About will open a window that shows you general, copyright, and license information about Midinous. You'll also see links to the GitHub page for Midinous, my personal music on Bandcamp, this YouTube channel, and the Ruby Gems page for Midinous. Notes by integer will open a window that shows you what integers correspond with what notes. MIDI handles notes from 0, which is C -2, to 127, which is G8. So each point in Midinous can be an integer from 0 to 127. Scales and intervals will show you different scales used in Midinous and the intervals that make up a given scale with step indicators, either halftones or whole tones. Note that in Midinous, the traditional major scale is labeled as Ionian and minor is labeled as Aeolian. Hotkeys will probably be the most useful window to have open until you get comfortable with the various commands of Midinous. All enabled keyboard shortcuts can be viewed here. Finally, the toolbox displays the currently selected tool. The name of the tool is displayed to the right of the tool buttons. By default, the Select tool is enabled. From left to right, Select, Place, Move, and Path. The Build Path button is enabled only when the Path tool is selected. Now, for Propellerhead Reason fans, I'll be using Midinous with Reason version 10 today on Windows 10. However, the concepts of linking Midinous with other DAWs remain similar. In effect, Midinous works by linking with a host DAW's, or a MIDI controller's, MIDI ports via a virtual MIDI cable. If composing through Midinous, a controller can send data to Midinous, and then the program sends data to the host DAW. Midinous can work through Microsoft's built-in synthesizer, but there is usually unwanted latency and a lack of sound variety, so I recommend if you have a DAW to use it. In using Reason with a virtual MIDI port program, which you can find free online, you'll want to go to Edit, Preferences, Control Surfaces, and Add Manually. The manufacturer will be Other. Choose a generic controller on any open MIDI channel. I'm creating one now on channel 8, since 1 to 7 are already set up on the chosen port. Give it a useful name that identifies the channel. I name mine Ruby MIDI channel and then a number corresponding to the channel. Ruby is the programming language that Midinous is created in, so that's what I named the virtual MIDI port. You can configure up to 16 channels on each port, and Midinous has support for multiple ports, allowing you to swap between sets of instruments fairly easily using the input and output menus discussed earlier. Once you name your control surface, select the in port as named in your virtual MIDI cable. Out port is not used in Midinous, so leave that unselected. Push OK and you'll be prompted with only select an out port if your MIDI controller is prepared to receive from Reason the same CC it's sending to Reason, else leave the out port as not selected. Push OK, recognizing that out port should not be selected for these controller definitions. Now your channel is set up to receive information from Midinous. To assign the channel exclusively to an instrument in Reason, right-click the device or mix channel and select Lock Ruby MIDI channel number to this device. So we just created 8, so we'll lock Ruby MIDI channel 8 to this device. You're essentially locking a controller to a device so that the controller, in this case a virtual MIDI port, remains tied to it, preventing certain channels from playing MIDI that they are not intended to play. In this case, we'll use the same port we set up in Reason, Ruby MIDI. In Midinous, for assuredness, we'll select Edit, I/O Regenerate, then select Ruby MIDI from the output menu item. To start arranging notes, switch to the Place tool. While using the Place tool, you can click anywhere in the grid to place a point at the cursor. Switch back to the Select tool and click the point. Point properties are now populated on the right. Note is the current note represented by an integer. All new points have a default note of 60, which is middle C. Velocity is the velocity value that will be sent with the note to the DAW. Duration is the length of the note in beats. The space between two grid points is a beat. Channel is the MIDI channel that the note will play through. The default channel is 1. Repeat is how many times the note will play after the initial note. A value of 1 here means the point plays twice. X-coordinate is the relative grid position along the x-axis within the grid area, and y-coordinate is the same along the y-axis. In Midinous, y values ascend from top to bottom. If you modify the property, it will snap to the grid as long as it's in bounds relative to the maximum size of the workable canvas, which is 4400 by 4400. Otherwise, Midinous will not accept the input at all. Color controls the color of the point. You can modify the property by typing in the 6-character hex code without the pound sign. Values go from 6 zeros to 6 Fs. Color also affects the chevron color of path terminators. Path mode controls the direction of the paths when a path has to make a turn to get to the next point. Acceptable values are HORZ for horizontal orientation and VERT for vertical orientation. Signal start can either be true or false, and will tell Midinous where to start playing MIDI when play is triggered. Play mode controls how signals are propagated across points. Acceptable values are Robin, Portal, Split, and Random. Robin and Portal are the only acceptable values for one-way paths. If a note has more than one path leaving it, it can have any play mode. To change our selected point to represent a signal starting point, or a point where notes will start playing if we push play, either push the A keyboard key, or select the signal start property, type true, and press enter. You can also push the apply button. The point will change shape to a flattened octagon, representing a signal starter. If you now press the spacebar, push num6, or press play in the performance section, you'll hear a note from that point. At this time, you can modify the note property the same way as the signal start property. If we select our point, we can click the Note property in the Point Properties menu and type a new value, just as we did with the Signal Start property. Push Enter or click Apply, and the new note is applied to the point. Note values range from 0 to 127. Let's link up 2 points. We'll place a point using the Place tool, and now we will switch to the Path tool. Click the point that you want to source the path from. In this case, we'll click our first point, which is set up as a starting point. The point will light up blue, indicating that it will be used as a source. Now we'll click the destination point and it will light up green. Once the path is staged, type T or click Build Path in the toolbox to build the path between the points. Notice the chevron next to the destination point. This tells us that there is one path entering this point, and also tells us from which direction the path is entering the point. Points have a many-to-many relationship, meaning a point can have many paths leading to it from other points and away from it to other points. If we once again start play, we'll now hear 2 notes separated by 4 beats at our selected tempo. When building paths, you can select multiple destination points before construction. Each destination point will be lit green. Clicking a point while using the Select tool will show you what paths are outputs via the path colors, changing from their default blue to a soft green. To quickly remove all outgoing paths on a selected point or points, press the End key on your keyboard. This will also set the point back to the Robin play mode. To remove all incoming paths, press the Home key. Remember that all shortcuts for these functions can be found in the Help Hotkeys window. To change the grid display, which changes the representation of time signature, use the left and right brackets. The time signature numerator will change along with the spacing between grid line intersections. This does not affect the speed at which signals move in Midinous. The time signature numerator ranges from 1 to 16. To change the time signature denominator, use the left and right curly braces. Changing this value will not affect the grid display, but will affect the speed at which signals move. Larger numbers mean faster play. The denominator ranges from 2 to 16 in powers of 2. This essentially increases the resolution of Midinous to play more precise pieces of music. I advise modifying this only before you begin composing. Changing this value after notes are in the grid will not change the distance between them. Midinous has a special feature which allows it to use relative pitches to dynamically change the notes that are playing as a sequence runs. To use this feature, edit a point's note property as you normally would, but instead of an integer, put a plus or minus next to the number, from -99 to +99. This will tell Midinous to shift the pitch by the number of semitones specified from its previous point. This allows independent signals to play different notes using the same point at the same or different times. By default, scale and root are set to chromatic and 60 respectively, meaning the root note of the project is middle C, and there are 12 pitches in the scale. Changing the root and the scale only affects the behavior of the relative pitches, and makes it easier to snap to a certain scale while notes are playing. For example, a +3 defined for a point on the chromatic scale will be different than a +3 on the Aeolian scale. To change the scale, click on it near the bottom right to open a drop-down menu of selectable scales within Midinous. The most common pitch-specific scales are available for use, and they are all unique. Details of the scales and their semitone intervals are in the Help, Scales, and Intervals window. To change the root, either use the plus and minus buttons next to the root number, or select the number and modify it directly. Values range from 0 to 127. Next, we'll move some points around using the Move tool. In order to move points, they must be selected. Using the Selection tool, select a single point you want to move by clicking, or draw a selection box to select multiple points. You'll also notice that the Point Properties pane changes if there are multiple points selected. You can modify any of the listed properties and they will apply to all selected points. Now that we have at least one point selected, we'll switch to the Move tool, either by clicking the Move tool button or pushing E. To move points, click and hold down the cursor in the grid pane and drag. You will see a stencil that will show you the relative movement of the points. If we want the points to move down and to the right one grid square, we can drag the Move stencil to represent that movement. Once the stencil is released, the selected points will move. Note that you cannot intersect points, so if there are points in the way of the intended movement, the move will not take place. To deselect the points, you can switch back to the selection tool and click anywhere in the grid. You can copy and paste sets of points by selecting them and pressing Ctrl-C, followed by Ctrl-V, respectively. The pasted points will take the point with the smallest coordinate, upper left, and place it at the cursor position when the paste command is issued. You can also cut and paste points using Ctrl-X. Pasting works the same, except that at the time of the first paste, the original points will disappear. Finally, to save your project, click the File, Save, or Save As option. Or use Ctrl-S. If the project is new, the default save operation is Save As. If the project exists and is already saved, Ctrl-S quick saves the project in the same location and overwrites the previous version. The File Explorer works like any other. Navigate to the location you want to save, give the file a name, and then click Save. Saved Midinous project files are saved with a suffix of .nous. This suffix is automatically applied if it is not present at the time of save. Open works similarly. File, Open. Navigate to your file, select it, then click Open. To quit Midinous, use Alt F4, Control Q, or File Quit. You will always be prompted to save your work before the program closes, even when using Alt F4. Included with Midinous is a sample project containing every basic feature that Midinous uses and that we have covered today. You can find it in the Midinous install directory under the Saves folder. I suggest opening that project to get a feel for what Midinous is capable of. I'll open it now and let it play us out. Thanks for watching, and happy experimenting.